Hello, and welcome to another episode of Brettcast Movie and TV Talk. Recently, I have been rewatching one of my favorite, and in my opinion, one of the best Transformers shows ever, Transformers Prime. As always, remember that this video is my opinion, and you are more than welcome to disagree with my opinion. But don't come to me and tell me that I'm wrong and you're right, because that's the kind of talk that's gonna get you banned. Anyways, I think that Transformers Prime is probably one of the best, if not the best Transformers show aside from G1. Yes, I think it's miles better than Transformers Animated, the last Robots in Disguise 2014, I think it was, the Prime Wars trilogy, and yes, even better than the recent War for Cybertron trilogy on Netflix. To me, Transformers Prime feels like the last show that Hasbro really cared about, and they put a lot of love and care into the show, into each episode. What still surprises me to this day is that the show started in 2010, which for me, that's the height of the Michael Bay Transformers movies, since the following year is when Dark of the Moon came out, and the previous year is when Revenge of the Fallen came out, and this show happens to go right in between Revenge of the Fallen and Dark of the Moon, not story-wise, but just in terms of when it came out. So let's get into Transformers Prime more. First, the characters. You have the leader of the Autobots, Optimus Prime. Sure, the design of Prime is pretty close to the Michael Bay design for Prime, but throughout the course of the show, this version of Optimus Prime has more character to him than any version of Optimus Prime in Transformers shows today. Then there's Bumblebee, who, like Prime, is kind of like how Bumblebee was in the Bay movies. It's a yellow and black sports car. Of course, in, I think it's season 2 or 3, I think 3, he reverses his colors, so he's more black than yellow, but still, it's a sports car, and B doesn't talk, but they didn't do the radio thing, just random noises, and it works just fine. You have RC, who to most newer Transformers fans at the time that the show was new, she was a pretty unknown character. Like, she had a very small part in Revenge of the Fallen, but she was still not a very well-known character. RC has a very dark past because she has a lot of partners that died throughout the War for Cybertron and, of course, on Earth. You have Bulkhead, who makes a much better character here in Transformers Prime than he does in Transformers Animated. He's the big guy and is more of the comic relief. We then have Ratchet, who is the old war dog that doesn't really like being on Earth or humans in general, but through the show he learns to like humans and being on Earth as well, while still regarding the past on Cybertron. There's Wheeljack, who is a complete character flip from most incarnations of the character. Wheeljack is usually the scientist type, but in Transformers Prime they decided to make Wheeljack one of the wreckers, and I quite like this Wheeljack just as much as he is when he's a scientist. Then there's Ultra Magnus, who is the usual military commander hardass that shares the design to how Optimus Prime is in seasons 1 and 2, but with bigger shoulders. Plus, in season 3, Optimus Prime gets a new look. So yeah, Magnus uses that season 1 and 2 look of Optimus Prime, but with bigger shoulders. And finally, we have Smokescreen, who is like another Bumblebee, but more the new recruit kind of person. And he makes mistakes, but he learns. And yeah, there is Cliffjumper, but Cliffjumper dies in one episode. Can't really say much more on him. On the flip side, we have Megatron, the leader of the Decepticons. This Megatron is a sweet jet design that I quite like a lot. You have Soundwave, who doesn't talk at all, but his face is like a screen, and he is still super smart, and has Laserbeak that deploys from his chest. You have Starscream, that is probably the best version of Starscream since G1. Yeah, he's got heels, but he is constantly trying to become the leader of the Decepticons and overthrow Megatron, and it's great. It's great. Season 3 is when Shockwave joins the party, and yes, he's that mono-eyed evil genius that everyone loves. His design is kind of like the Shockwave design from Dark of the Moon, but only slightly the same. Then you have some of the lesser of the named Decepticon characters like Breakdown, Knockout, Arachnid, and Dreadwing. The thing is that some of these characters' sole purpose is to be the nemesis to one of the Autobots. Arachnid is the nemesis to RC, Breakdown is the nemesis to Bulkhead, and Knockout is kind of the nemesis to Bumblebee. Of course, there's more enemies and groups as well. There's the Insecticons that all look the same. The Decepticons have their Viacons and Viacon jets that all look the same. Of course, in Season 3 and the movie, there's Predaking and the Predacons. Now, one thing that I didn't like in Transformers Animated is they had a lot of human characters that happened to have technology that made them formidable against the Autobots, and I didn't like that at all. But Transformers Prime managed to do it right with this group called Mech. They show up mostly in Season 1 as far as I can remember. I'm still early in Season 2 at this point, but they're not bad. They're like this group of humans that eventually gets their hands on Cybertronian tech and eventually makes their own Optimus Prime, which was this show's version of Nemesis Prime. It shouldn't work, but it does, and I think they're one of the better human groups in a Transformers show to be villains. Speaking of humans, there of course has to be the humans in the form of Jack, Miko, and Raphael, but also Special Agent William Fowler and Jack's mom, who through most of the show is just Nurse Darby. The human characters in terms of look is one aspect where the animation style kind of doesn't work for them. Jack is the responsible one of the group, with his guardian being RC. Miko is the exact opposite of Jack, where he is all about having fun and being really careless, and her guardian is Bulkhead. Raphael is a smart tech head with his laptop, and his guardian is Bumblebee, but he also helps out Ratchet a lot too. Agent Fowler is both a hard ass, but sometimes he's the comedic one too. He has some of the funniest lines in the show. Then we have Jack's mom, Nurse Darby, that we never really learn her first name, but his mom is a nurse, and sometimes she butts head with Ratchet, and it's kind of great. The weird thing is that Agent Fowler definitely has a romantic interest in Nurse Darby, and they sprinkle it in there just a bit, but not too much. Now let's get into the meat of the actual show itself, and why I think Transformers Prime is probably one of the best Transformers shows since G1. Recently, the War for Cybertron trilogy ramped up with Transformers Kingdom, and one of the negatives I've heard about the whole trilogy is that it's just a bunch of references to G1 and Beast Wars, and I totally agree with that. Something I've not seen a Transformers show do since Transformers Prime is have actual Transformers mythos within the show, and that's a real travesty. Transformers Prime has a ton of Transformers mythos in it. They talk about how Optimus Prime was Orion Pax, who was a clerk in the Iacon Hall of Records. Megatron was a gladiator named after one of the 13 Primes, Megatronus. The two went to the High Council of Cybertron to propose their ideas for a better world on Cybertron, and Megatron wants to do things by force, but Orion Pax doesn't. And how Orion Pax gives a speech that moved the council enough to name him the next Prime, and that was when the friendship between Megatron and Orion Pax ended. Transformers Prime explains that Unicron and Primus are basically gods, and they fought for like a gazillion years until Primus created 13 Primes, defeated Unicron, and crashed him out into space, and then, debris forms around Unicron, and that made Earth, and Unicron was Earth. Did the Prime Wars trilogy do any of that? Did the War for Cybertron trilogy have any of that? No! Neither of those did, and it's shameful. It's downright shameful, because that is the kind of things that adds to making a Transformers show great, and that's what makes Transformers Prime one of the great shows. There is so much Transformers mythos in this that I've really only ever seen some of it in various Transformers comic books that I've read. There are only a few negatives to this show that I found. The first is that they reuse music a lot in each episode. Now, Season 1 is the only season to have an officially released score for this show, And it makes me wonder if they made any new music for this show in seasons 2 and 3. I'm sure they did, and it would have been nice if they could have made another score with new music tracks for seasons 2 and 3. And, I mean, even another for the movie that followed season 3. The other negative is one that I already mentioned, which is that the human characters kind of suffer in the looks area given the animation style. Mechanical things look great, but more organic shapes and things like people, not so much. Those are really the only two negatives that I can come up with the entirety of Transformers Prime. Rewatching this show makes me a little sad that this show is no longer going since. Rewatching this show makes me a little sad that this show is long since over and never got a fourth season, and only a movie to wrap things up. Then again, if they did keep it going, they probably would have just started scraping the barrel in terms of episode ideas, so it's probably good the show ended when it did. In my view, Transformers Prime will always be one of the best Transformers show to ever be made. That's all I have to say, so if you want to enter the conversation, leave a comment below. As always, thanks for listening, and goodbye.